Our first Primetime 2018 panel, 4 Vantage Points on the Future, will be moderated by Norman Lem. A veteran of the cable industry, Norman was most recently Vice President of Video Product Management and Packaging for Time Warner Cable in New York City. He's also held positions at both Rogers and Bell over his 25-year career. At Rogers, he served as head of programming and video project management. And in his time at Bell, he worked as the director of programming for business affairs and news services. Currently running his own consulting firm, Suite 47, Norman's varied experience in the cable sector makes him perfectly suited to moderate today's discussion. So please join me in welcoming Norman Lem and the panelists Heather Conway, Jay Gardner, John Penny, and John Young.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first panel of the day, 4 Vantage Points. And I just want to start by actually just taking a quick moment and introducing to you who actually is on the panel. So to my immediate left, I have, actually, requires no introduction really, but Heather Conway, who is Executive Vice President of English Services, CBC, and is going to actually present the broadcaster point of view today. Heather Conway joined the CBC as Executive Vice President of English Services in December 2013, and is responsible for all CBC services, English services. She was actually Chief Business Officer at the Art Gallery of Ontario, where she was in charge of human resources, digital services, marketing, security, among many other things. And under her tenure, the gallery actually saw its attendance increase by 20% and achieved its highest membership level in years. Previously, she also spent 6 years as Executive Vice President at Alliance Atlantis Communications, where she oversaw strategic marketing, publicity, on-air creative for 13 Canadian cable specialty channels. So welcome, Heather. To her left, I have Ed Penny, and he is actually, sorry, my mistake. We have John Penny, my mistake, John. Executive Vice President, Consumer Business Development and Partnerships, 20th Century Fox, and he's actually going to do two things. He's going to actually represent the CE and what's happening in the world of sort of devices, but also give us a perspective from a U.S. point of view, being American. So John is Executive Vice President of Consumer Business Development, Strategic Partnerships, responsible for identifying new business initiatives for 20th Century Fox. He focuses on accelerating and development and delivery of Fox's intellectual property across content distribution, new technology, and consumer channels. Penny also leads expansion efforts in international markets. John serves as on the executive board of the Consumer Technology Association, which is responsible for staging CES, the annual show in Las Vegas. He's also held senior positions with Starz, IMG, HBO, and Viacom. John also spent 7 years on Wall Street as an equity research corporate analyst, so welcome. To his immediate left, we have John Young, and he is the Chief Executive Officer of Boat Rocker Media, and he's going to represent the producer's point of view today. And Mr. Young is the Chief Executive Officer of Boat Rocker Media, a global entertainment company that creates, produces, and distributes premium content for all platforms, producing shows such as Orphan Black, The Next Step, Being Erica, Killjoys, Say Yes to the Dress Canada, MasterChef Canada, and X Company. Mr. Young previously served in various roles in the Ontario Municipal Employee Retirement System Pension Fund, which is OMERS, including Managing Director of OMERS Private Equity. Welcome, John. And then last but not least, Jay Gardner on the far left there, VP of Product Development, Shaw Communications, and he'll be representing the BDU point of view today. As VP of Product Development, Jay's role is to innovate with strategic partners, define Shaw's product roadmap, which we'll hear a lot about today, and launch new products for Shaw's residential and commercial service customers. Jay has led Shaw through a number of recent product launches, including Free Range TV and Blue Sky TV, and is helping establish an unprecedented technology partnership with Comcast. He spent 12 years in Shaw, with time in Edmonton and Vancouver regions, spanning sales, operations, product marketing, and most recently, product development within Shaw's Technology and Network Operations Department. So welcome to Jay. Okay, enough of that. So sorry for those introductions, but I just wanted to give you guys a good sense of who we have on the panel and just who we are talking to today. So we've got some real strong experts today. I'm going to try and limit my talking because these guys are really the folks you want to hear from. But one of the things we know, and I'm going to give you not necessarily data points, but some trends that are happening. Obviously, cable companies are losing subscribers at a rapid rate that we haven't seen in the past. We're seeing new entrants into the marketplace with OTT services and other products that are coming in here and challenging, for a viewership and eyeballs. We're seeing new disruptive technologies coming through, and we're seeing, a global sort of globalization of content like many industries are. So, obviously there are a lot of headwinds in our industry, and it's very easy with this group, anyways, to sit down and sort of immediately start getting a bit concerned about what's happening in the industry. And just what I'd like to talk about today is really flipping it on its head a little bit and actually talking about some of the opportunities that we're seeing. And so, I think it was, it's in times of adversity is when there's opportunity, and that's where I actually want to start. So maybe I'll start with Heather, who's to my immediate left here. And what, obviously, in the context of all the things I've said in this new media landscape, what do you see as some of the new opportunities that are arising for CBC?
I think for us, what the technology does, and in particular what a service like OTT allows us to do, is reach new audiences. I think our audience, as most of the people in the room know, tends to be a little bit older, very linear. And so as we move into the OTT world, we're able to give the digital audience that we've reached incredibly successfully through our news app and other things, access to the real breadth of our programming. We're able to put things on OTT that may never appear on linear. We're able to use our creator network that we work with for our short form content and give them opportunities. So I think for us it's really about reaching new audiences and generally younger ones.
Which is great, and I think probably part of the reason why the strategy and the thinking around why you guys came out with your OTT app.
Yes, for sure. I do want to be clear, I'm not sure that the other broadcasters wouldn't be rolling over in their graves to think I'm representing the broadcasters. I'm happy to represent CBC. I know that the broadcasters face a lot of similar challenges, but we also face very different challenges given our place in the Canadian ecosystem.
Fair point. I'm going to just jump along and sort of ask the same question to everybody. So, not to skip you right away, but go to John Young here. John, tell me the same thing, obviously, from a producer perspective. Like, what are the opportunities? I think, obviously, this crowd is particularly interested in. What do you think in this new landscape they can look forward to?
Well, I think the original opportunity, the opportunity that's always been there for producers and hasn't really changed at all in this disruptive, changing landscape is it's all about creating original IP. It's harder to come by, perhaps. We have to find it in different places, non-traditional places, but that ultimately is still the opportunity for us. Create original IP. With that, we can obviously build businesses, we can scale perhaps, and certainly we can enjoy the process of just making content, which is at the core of any producer's DNA. So I think the opportunity remains, despite the disruption and all of the things that are going on. How do we find that original IP? How do we continue to stick to that core? And with that, and the more we do of that, the better I think we'll be, and the stronger we can build our companies from that. So it remains the same opportunity, in fact. We just have to find it in different places. We're starting to build venture businesses to find other areas where the puck might be, so to speak, in terms of where that IP might come from. It's not going to come through the same traditional methods with writers and creators. The scarcity of talent is definitely upon us, and as more and more content gets made, that scarcity of talent is even more obvious to us. So we have to find our way to maneuver and find the places where that IP can come from, and it will still come from great writers and creators, but it might come from other sources too, and that's the opportunity, I think, for us.
Great, thank you very much. And we're going to come back to a little bit about that, about distribution and sort of the economics of it and sort of what the opportunity is. But before we do that, I'm going to jump over to John Penny, and from a CE perspective, obviously Las Vegas just happened, CES happened. You know, how are devices changing how we're looking at this, and what are the opportunities in that space with that are enabling?
Well, in the way I think about it, the future is going to be the same, only more so. So what you're seeing in an acceleration from, I'll call it screen proliferation within the home and out of the home will continue. At the very heart of the technological level of what we're seeing, very high resolution, large screens coming down in cost in the home. So if you walk the halls at CES, you would have seen very large 55-inch and up OLED screens, screens which are very, very powerful for creators that include high dynamic range, which is the real story in all of the technology I see in televisions going forward, because HDR is something that the eye can pick up so quickly versus just having more pixels in a 4K screen. So a very rich environment on the large screen. But the issue becomes how much is the large screen used versus the small screen. So if you just take some very broad stats on the amount of time spent on mobile devices, and I'm going to throw out a business stat because it's interesting to me, 80% of all advertising in the US on mobile devices is Facebook and Google. Therefore, most of the time that people are spending on their mobile devices are in social or other short-form content environments, like the very powerful and unique YouTube environment. That puts a creative challenge out there and an opportunity, as Norm was saying. The challenge is that people's attention spans are becoming much more fleeting. And you start to look at it in age-based segmentation. Young people having a very different form of attention. They can attend to things for long periods of time if it's worth it for them, but they give it much less opportunity to play out, less willingness to try unless their friend group is recommending. To the traditional me and many of you in the audience who will give a show 2 or 3 episodes or whatever it might be that we're watching, time to mature and develop. So that notion of the device in your pocket, its profile that is behind you, and then your behavior change induced by that device makes it a uniquely fragmented world for thinking about just the consumption. But if I flip it and now say, just as you were saying before, look at how many ways I can get to the end consumer and promote my content. And to the point of short form and otherwise building up a opportunity around a nascent or an existing franchise for creators and companies to directly connect. So I think we're at the very early stages of this. It's going to take a while to develop, but I would be very focused, as you might be, on Gen Y and what they will become as consumers, because they're really the bridge between all device or let me sit back every once in a while in front of a 65-inch OLED screen and enjoy some really big screen content. So opportunity, risk, but a lot of excitement, I'm sure, ahead on the device front.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Jay on the end there. From a BDU perspective, obviously, again, the headwinds are strong. Personally, being a BDU guy for most of my career, I see them, I feel it, everyone's feeling it. Tell us about sort of some of the challenges that Shaw's seeing these days and the opportunities that are coming out of them.
Yeah, excuse me. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about the challenges. On the opportunity side, by our count, the TV lovers, folks that consume lots of video, primarily on the big screen, are still, if not the majority, they're still the largest segment in our base. So we've got our challenges for sure and need to continue to innovate on the folks that are a little more price sensitive, a little more tech savvy, and spending less time in front of the TV and frankly, less willing to pay the kind of ARPU that we had traditionally seen. At the high end, though, the future's pretty bright for TV lovers in terms of what kind of technology is coming out, and we think Blue Sky and X1 is an example of that. Rogers and Videotron will be coming soon. It's in terms of what it can do in terms of voice search, curation, profiling. It really takes what frankly Netflix and some of the OTT guys have innovated on in terms of UI, individualization, curating content. Netflix is just so easy to use, and it never seems that difficult to find what you want. And so I think that's really raised the game of all players, including the BDUs and cable companies. And so we've got a great platform. We think the TV lovers, as you add more and more content and all this great storytelling that's coming out, the challenge has been traditionally, how do you get it in front of people and how do you self-promote? And some of the new technology on the big screen at the BDU level will allow content producers to do that. So we think the future is bright for that group.
Thank you very much. And we'll get into some of that information later. We hit some really big points, data and sort of new data sources and how we're using those to educate some of our decision making. But before we get into that, I'm going to turn to Heather, just because again, I think the audience is here. We've seen some specific trends that we talked about earlier, and one of them obviously is in Canada. Programmers are producing stuff, but the Canadian buyers seem to be getting a lot smaller. Obviously, with consolidation, vertically integrated companies. What do you think the impact of that is on your business? Are you seeing it from a production perspective? How are you guys finding the right rights to buy? What is the strategy in your mind around that particular piece of the business?
Listen, I think for the public broadcaster, the issue is what are the right audience rights? And we've talked about the right rights in other fora, and I think our stance is well known. We're primarily interested in the Canadian rights. Both digital and linear, but we're not interested in international rights where we believe our role is more in the vein of how do we let a producer create something that can have international success? How do we work with them to ensure that we give it all the chance to do that? That said, I think one of the biggest challenges facing broadcasters is the cost of content. And it's not just a CBC problem, obviously, but I've got a very dramatic example. Netflix made a really wonderful show called The Crown. And The Crown cost about, by all estimates, about $130 million US for 10 episodes. That is roughly the same of the entire non-news programming budget of the CBC for an entire year. So kudos to Sally Cato and team who managed to fill primetime, daytime, all the non-news hours of the day for roughly the cost of one 10-episode series. So, our ability to compete in a world of exceptional global content is becoming tougher and tougher, and that's true not just for the CBC. Our situation is particularly dramatic because we program over 90% Canadian in prime, but it's a problem being faced by every broadcaster in the room, and I'm not sure what the answer is going to be. For us, we certainly want to be able to continue to give Canadian producers as much as we can. There's no, I'm not looking for the money, as people know, but I do understand that the crunch that's being placed on some of the other broadcasters, and, as John said, the war for talent is very, very real. When we made a show like Anne as a co-pro with Netflix, that's one of the ways we're dealing with it, is partner with somebody who can up the budget. That show is now one of the most watched, most binge shows for Netflix worldwide. Yay. It's, can we do that over and over and over again? I think that's going to be one of the challenges.
I think that's right, and I'm going to throw to John Young here very quickly. obviously, again, we talked about this a little bit, which is we're competing on a global scale now. And obviously, there comes challenges with that when companies have much larger scale than those in Canada. Again, if we're talking about budgets of $130 million for one show, how are producers finding or meeting that challenge of filling the rest of the spots, if you will, or coming up with these compelling storylines in that space?
We're with difficulty is the answer, I guess. But the globalization genie is not going back in the bottle. So we've got to find a way to make content travel. If we're building and making content here in Toronto, it has to travel. It's the only way for us, I think, to ultimately build our business outside of Canada and ultimately sustainable in the long term. So those challenges are absolutely there. The cost of making content for the buyers of that content obviously is rising. The revenues, the streams of revenue coming into those buyers is declining. So as the producer caught trying to find a solution, that the producer's lot of always trying to solve problems remains. And I think we have to, and I think we are up for that challenge of finding new partnerships, new ways to think about the rights that are available in a piece of IP and content. It's not so much about fighting for all of the rights, it's about fighting for the rights that are valuable for your business as your business is. So, you know, Netflix and others, there's certain rights that are not very valuable to them right now. So how do we build a part of the business that can work and partner with Netflix to do that? Whereas another buyer of content, maybe a traditional broadcaster or otherwise, may have a great ability to monetize those rights better than perhaps any producer can. So how do we partner up in that way? So there are lots of rights out there, of course. We all want to try and get them, but I think now in this competitive environment, I think it's a little easier to focus on the ones you can truly exploit, which ones you're best at exploiting, and try to partner with the other buyers of the content to ultimately get content made, ultimately have it travel around the world, and ultimately have ancillary revenue that is so exciting when you're making a piece of content in Toronto and you're getting revenue streams flowing in from other parts of the world while you're sleeping. Is a great thing, right?
And just to touch a little bit more on that from a business model perspective, is it partnerships? Is it co-productions? Like is there something in there? Obviously, there's not one solution for everything, but is there something in particular you're finding that's working, that's helping that production?
It's everything. You have to really just sit down all the time. There's no perfect answer. There's no solution. There's no panacea that jumps up and says, that's the model. You're constantly playing around with it. And I think as all the producers in this room, they're trying things differently now that they never did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. They're bringing in more financing from more countries and more partnerships with people they never thought they'd be partnering with. So I think the answer is sitting down around those tables and try to figure out horses for courses. What is the piece of content you're trying to make? Where is the ultimate buyer, and how will this travel, and who do you need to come to the table to help you get your passion, get your content made? So there's no real sort of answer, as I say. I think it's constantly trying to find those partnerships. It's a very disruptive, very changing environment, and I think the broadcasters, everyone's becoming more competitive. And broadcasters are competing in the traditional producer landscape too. So that's tougher for producers, obviously. But again, I think working ways to find how you can exploit the rights that are valuable to your company with those partnerships, I think is the way to go. And diversification also is a helpful tool, a necessary survival tool. We started making, I suspect, drama in the first instance, and then moving into unscripted and factual content, and now digital and formats. And so we're constantly diversifying from the core in order to survive, and hopefully we can build businesses in each of those as we go. So diversification is also a helpful tool in order to continue to be in the fight, if you will.
That's great. Thank you. John, I'm going to turn it to you for just 1 second and just talk more about sort of OTT, obviously, and some of the questions that are coming. Oh, there you go. You got a mic. OTT really, and obviously a lot of U.S. companies are going this solo OTT route, and obviously with devices in America like Roku's and other things that are enabling this sort of solo or over-the-top sensation. What do you think the impact of that's going to be, and is that obviously that's going to expand? How in your mind or estimation are you going to? And there's going to be a follow-up question to that, but I'm just curious on what you're seeing the impact of that is.
That's great. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. It's fun getting to hold this. So it's actually a fairly complex landscape right now that I think will become simpler in the future. And what you're seeing, to Norm's question, is multiple enabling service platforms allowing people to create OTT offerings, from smaller networks to specialized content forms. So Roku was mentioned. Sidecar Box probably has, at this point, thousands of channels on it. Amazon has it on top of Amazon Prime through Fire and all the other devices, and Apple TV will do the same. The problem, having built some OTT businesses, the problem that people forget in OTT is that it's actually an e-commerce business that uses content to have recurring revenue. It's not your traditional media business because it's not a content to packaging intermediary like a network where then the network takes it out, markets the material. You do it all yourself. So the business model of OTT is non-comparable when you're running the entire stack of activities from the e-commerce funnel of acquisition to product to delivery of the technology. While all of that's easier to do today than ever before, it's a lot more work than most media companies have ever played with. Therefore, what you see are a wide variety of what I'll call intermediate OTT services that look ripe for the opportunity longer term to be merged into other OTT offerings. So you might have, premium networks that are smaller. You might have a network just focused on an OTT service focused on dogs, cats, action, whatever it might be, foreign language. But when you look at their ability to really scale and become large, they're ahead of themselves in terms of business model. To John's point, they can't, because they can't place bets all over the place. They have to place it through a specific box getting to a specific TV. They have a bigger challenge. On the high side of large-scale OTT, like the folks that work with Jay and others, that is still a very robust business and still opportunity. So when you're talking about the HBOs and HBO Now, Stars, obviously Netflix, Amazon Prime, but there's a really interesting problem that I hope you don't have in Canada that we have in the United States. People don't have money. I mean, we're working in a world where the Gini coefficient of the United States is worse than Mexico, so that's the dispersion of income. So there are only about 40 million homes in the United States out of 125 that have an income of $75,000 and up. To look at it another way, 60% of homes don't have $500 in savings. So they're working literally paycheck to paycheck. So when you put OTT into that context, a survey was just done, you'll find people say, I can't really afford more than 2 services. No matter how good the box is, how high the fidelity of the content is, it's a kitchen table economics issue. So ultimately, recreating the bundle through OTT is satisfying that 40 million homes that have the money to do it and they like choice. But for the rest of them, it's going to be a Faustian bargain for the folks who think that that's a market that they can scale. So yes, a lot of opportunity, but only for the really strong of stomach and those who are willing to see it as a very large play. But an acquisition also could be useful. And the technology companies will keep giving us better platforms to make it more easy. Therefore, the more seamless, the more difficult it is to compete against other players. I know that was long, but I tried to give you the full swath there, at least the U.S. perspective.
That was great. And, just a follow-up to that then is, when you're talking about these niche particular, dog network, whatever they are, is there an opportunity there for small independent producers, do you think? And I'd open up to anybody really, is there an opportunity there to sort of say, okay, I'm going to team up with one of these guys and start producing some very specific content for them?
I'll just, for the producers to speak for themselves, but absolutely, and the economics can absolutely support that, especially if you're looking at it as a global play, because the one nice thing about niche OTT is you can reserve rights. When you walk into Netflix, it's a one-stop shop, or any of the others. So the classical partitioning of the world in a licensing scheme where you'd have North America, Europe, and then the rest can be done with more niche OTT services. The challenge is getting the volume of content that makes it meaningful for whoever you're selling it to outside the primary service offering.
Right. And I guess that begs the question, obviously we've talked about these very large scale productions. We're hearing about more small scale in this kind of context. Is there something in the middle there? And maybe John, this is more to you. Is there something in the middle there that we can sustain, or is there a business opportunity there?
Yeah, there is. The middle of anything is, perhaps not the best place to be in economics and business. It tends to get squeezed, and I think we've seen that in content too, where we have very expensive premium content, a huge demand, ever-increasing budgets, ever-increasing demand, it seems, and therefore, if you just think of the budgets in Canada, what was a $1.5 or $1 to $2 million budget for a 1-hour drama was a healthy budget, 10 years ago. Now, trying to get a $2 or $3 million budget drama made is very difficult. It's very difficult indeed how to fund it, how to get the right people, and again, to make it a business worth entirely funding, leaving aside the quality of the content. So, because $5, $6, $10 million an episode is now what premium is, so that middle is definitely squeezed. And there's obviously a spectrum of what is the lower end and the higher end, but I think it's tough to be in that range. I think we have to find ways to finance shows that really give the opportunity for the content to travel well and get out. But it is difficult in the middle. And if you look at a spectrum of user-generated content in terms of ad revenue funded content, well, that's a whole different ballgame. That's a whole different spectrum. You can't bring that user-generated ad revenue-based content and big budget drama in the same sentence. It's a very different one altogether. Now we're seeing the spectrum of the user-generated content, and I suspect the middle of that spectrum is probably a tough place to be as well now. So it is hard, and I think for us, certainly at Temple Street and other companies of ours now building budgets for drama, it's very challenging at a certain level. I think we can make them a little bit cheaper. They're easier to get going, and they may not quite have the same ability to travel outside the country, but trying to get a big budget drama prepared is a very tough task and needs a lot of partners and a lot of buyers to come to the table. Hence, scaling a production business into a distribution and rights business gives you the opportunity to get that data, to have those touch points around the world with different buyers, finding out the information in a way to try and get those bigger shows, bigger budget shows made.
It's the same thing for the broadcasters. You kind of go, okay, I had to build a linear business, now I have to build a digital business, now I have to build an OTT business, now I have to develop expertise in data analytics. It's all great, and it all costs enormous amounts of money, and the payback is not obvious, but you can't not, because you will actually make strategic and other errors if you don't have good data, if you don't offer people what they're looking for. So it is a constant challenge to try and develop all the new skills, create great products, while continuing to do all the things that you're expected to do on the other side, particularly for us who have a mandate to meet. And so can't really say, okay, I'm going to stop doing that because I'm going to invest here. There's almost no ability to say what I'm going to stop doing. So it's a huge challenge, and I think for producers it's a big challenge as well. You know, I look at the behavior even of my 7-year-old who, you know, has the Netflix habit and likes the idea of the CBC, mostly because I work there. But if I say to her, and I'm not going to say who my bundle provider is, but if I say to her, well, we can look on the TV for it, her reaction is, oh, do we have to? Because it's such a painful experience, right? That seamless experience that she's used to of next, 8 seconds, 3 seconds, 4. This is what she wants. This is what we're trying to create with the CBC OTT platform. You know, we want to be a complement. We like our chances strategically because we have a very clear offering of, we're Canadian. That's our thing. So, you know, yes, you're going to have that service. Yes, you might have, if you're a foodie, you might have a very highly specialized OTT offering. You might have Amazon Prime. But to your point, you're not going to have 200 OTT services, I don't think, unless OTT services suddenly become the price of bundled channels. And, you know, this is why I like our chances, because in a world of international services that can come from anywhere, which is wonderful as a consumer, as a citizen, you're probably going to say, I should have a Canadian service, I think. I think for my Canadian news, for my Canadian, maybe Canadian satire or comedy, whatever, I'll get the CBC one. That's our hope.
That's right. Jay, I haven't forgotten about you on the end there. So this might be a nice segue, actually, to sort of still on this consumer expectation piece, you're talking about your 7-year-old. What is Shaw doing, particularly in this space, about seeing what trends from a consumer perspective are out there? How is X1 addressing some of those concerns? And I guess the last part is, from a production perspective, or are there some opportunities for producers in this new environment that you guys have launched with the X1 platform?
Yeah, I think Heather nailed it. I mean, traditionally, when you have that much content in an aggregated, distributed model, it's been traditionally hard to make that easy. And I think some of the stuff we touched on at the top is making that easy. So things like voice commands, curated content. It's very an IMDb type experience. You'll find yourself sort of lost in it. My 3-year-old uses Blue Sky as commonly as Netflix and finds his way. It's really that intuitive. So again, I think that's more of a sunrise story. There's lots of good innovation there, and it's a long time overdue. Let's face it. So I'm happy to see that. On the challenges side and on the distribution, OTT really what it's done is it's made everybody in the content business a distributor. And I think what people are realizing is that it's a hard game. It's a hard game. So not only do you have things like DRM, but I mean, think about the investment that Netflix has made in distribution, being that pervasive on that many applications, that many devices, in a sea of change, from Roku sticks to smart TVs, consoles, not to mention mobile, Chromecast. I mean, there's literally an endless range of applications that they're constantly developing on. Now, they have a one-size-fits-all model in terms of billing, but the back office, having to have customers, support them, all the tech support that goes with it, the back office requirements to make all that work. Distribution's a tough game, and I think what you're commenting on is that, yeah, some of the big brands will do okay, but I do see this disaggregation, then a reaggregation happening in the industry, and there will be some folks that either don't have the scale or don't have the content. They're going to have to find a dance partner, and that's the way they're going to get their stuff to customers. We're really on the low end trying to figure out what our role is and whether or not there's enough that's not in the OTT landscape that we need to bring and aggregate to that customers, and at what price, and how do you make the economics work, and how do you strip out costs of the business to actually make a legitimate business out of that. Those are some of the things that are going on right now for us.
And Jay, does that end up being something like an SVOD or something that is more of a rev share type of model? Again, for content producers, do they come up and say, listen, I've got this great set of content. Can we come to you as with X1? Discovery's a little easier, but is that the business model? We're coming to you with a specific SVOD type of product.
Yeah, my personal view on that is that the content side and the broadcasters are in a much better position to do that. And you even saw with Show Me that that's not a slam dunk necessarily if you don't get it right. So I think as a BDU, really your role as an aggregator, and if you try to play sort of a step down in the value chain where you're trying to aggregate a bunch of SVOD content, package it all up, I think the broadcasters and the content guys are better suited for that. And if there's an aggregated brand, sort of the next Crave of Canada, I think that's great for consumers. And if you can bundle that all together, that's great. But then you get into, okay, well, who's going to bundle it all together? Does it need to be bundled? What role does Apple and Google play? Maybe they're the aggregators. Right. That's where it gets really interesting on the low end.
Thank you very much, Jay. I'm going to throw this out to the group because obviously we're talking about this sort of global environment. We're talking about, new business models. We're talking about sort of sourcing and qualifying content. Obviously, as a result of that, we need new tools. And I'm assuming there's some new tools out there. So, I'll put it out there to anyone who wants to sort of go with it is, from a data perspective, are we looking at different sets of data? I'm sure with X1, there's usage data and things of that nature that are a little bit more evolved. Are there data sources out there that we're using to educate our what we're producing? Because again, if you look at something like YouTube, we were talking about all our kids watch YouTube. YouTube knows very clearly what everyone's watching, when they're watching it, time of day, duration, all these things. I'm assuming that they're using that data to go and source things that are similar or they're building this content strategy from that. Are there pieces out there today that you're looking at, anyone on the panel, that's helping you educate that?
I think our hope is to get a better understanding of what our audience wants, but this is a business of magic, right? And as much as everybody wants there to be a data answer to what show should I make, because it's the answer to the holy grail of just make hits. I'm not sure that you're ever going to be able to account for magic, and sometimes that's why we're all in the business, right? We're not in the business because we're data scientists. Yes, you're going to get some better data. Yes, you're going to be able to better serve your audience. But I guarantee you, the people who work at Netflix in the content business
They're not looking at
they're more
spreadsheets all day.
excited every day than the people who work in the analytics piece of the business. I mean, analytics they're exciting to analysts.
Yes.
But
No offense to any analyst out there.
I think, it's never going to be an either or. There's, yes, the data is important. Yes, it informs you. Our challenge is, frankly, volume. We have to get more volume on our platform, which is why we're looking at talking to other folks, a TVO or somebody whose content may never be seen outside of Ontario. But it's getting the volumes is what gets you the data insights.
Just, can I follow up on one thing? Because I like that. There's a different way of looking at it when you're not looking at it from what content I should make. One of the things that I like to say, it's about technology too. The impact of data is overestimated in the short term and underestimated in the long run, just like technology. If you're in an ad-supported environment or otherwise, the data piece is really about moving towards the world of e-commerce and the notion of a personal profile. And that's going to happen despite media wanting to be in it or not, because it's going to happen via social and via commerce channels, Amazon. When that happens, and those players are also in the content business, what they will do is not necessarily look at how to make a hit better. They will look at what's not working and be able to act on that faster. So unfortunately, when you are in that content world that I've been in, where shows do cost $3 to $10 million, you're going to see, like in traditional ad-supported media, if the viewers don't show up by episode 3, at least in the United States, a $5 million show is done. That actually raises the risk profile significantly of shows that are sold on a la carte basis. So what I think will happen over time is the data environment will become so much more robust so that it does two things. It's a better lingua franca than we use Nielsen in the United States as an enabling currency, and it's has all of its issues, but it is what it is. But as it becomes, data becomes a competitive weapon amongst these large platform owners, being in the mindset of understanding their views of, quote, what's working for their customers will be a real advantage point for producers who can just see through that telescope too. Again, you're right, you can't just make hits. That would obviously not work. But I think then the opportunity as data becomes, more powerful in the long run as personally identifiable information rather than anonymized data, that's the point where unique new things can happen. And not all of them good, but we need to at least speak their language, as I know we all can on this panel. But it's definitely coming whether we like it or not, because it's going to come from other industries around people we call viewers, but they're actually just consumers of everything.
And I think the problem with most producers and distributors, not so much the problem, but we're in the dark ages when it comes to that data. We get our information from a semi-cohesive, half-drunken conversation at a market with a buyer who's trying to explain to one of our rights team about what's working and what's not. So we're so far away from getting to the end consumer and understanding truly what happens there. But that goes to the B2C, B2B part. Producers, distributors, businesses like ours are still very much B2B, and until we can parlay into a more of a B2C world, we won't have the access to that data. We know it's valuable, and I totally agree with Heather. Is it the be-all and end-all. No, it's not, but it's certainly worth getting than not. So I think, you know, for us, it's how do you get closer to that consumer? How do we take the IP that we're creating and directly touch the consumer? And we're slowly starting to have some success there, but it really does. It's a hard road to hoe, and I think we've got to keep going down that path. And the more we get to that consumer, the more information we can get, the more feedback that can help our ability to create the IP I was talking about at the start. So, but we're back. We're still in the dark ages, afraid. But
Yeah, it helps discoverability, it helps marketing campaigns, it helps everything, right? It's not just about, you know, is this show popular or not? It's very much about this personalization and customization and finding the right audience for the show. Sometimes it's insights that help you on that front. Sorry, I'm hearing a lot of sibilance on my mic, so I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, I think in addition to the, you know, identifying hits and misses sooner, certainly in an aggregated world, that data, whether you're a Netflix or a Shaw, in terms of being able to do contextual recommendations, those who watch this also watch that, sort of keeps people in the system. It's the new way to cross-promote shows. And so that data all has value for sure. I think in an ad-based model too, data has, to me, data is the future in that model. Whether it's programmatic upstream, making sure that you're targeting the right ads or the right shows, or downstream once you get into a dynamic ad insert, which is a good idea, long overdue. You know, that's going to breathe life into the system, and it has a bit of a virtuous cycle type of effect if it's done to its potential. It could breathe some life into shows and services that otherwise may not have made it had there not been this new revenue opportunity. So I'm still hopeful.
Jay, I'm going to stick with you for a second and sort of talk about, you know, obviously it being the last mile to the consumer. We've seen a bunch of different technologies there that have come through. Some have stuck, some haven't. 3D obviously was short-lived. 4K seems like something that's going to stay. You know, AR, VR, all these things. You know, in your estimation, you know, again, in the context of the sort of new sort of consumer, you know, experiential technology, is there something there that Shaw's looking at that, again, are creating opportunities for people to look at? You know, should we, you know, be all running out and, you know, developing content for AR, VR?
Yeah, when did we do our CTAM panel?
That was about a year ago.
About a year ago? Yeah. You asked me the same question, is 4K for real? And so I was on the record saying I think it's going to take, and I still take that position. It's been a bit of a slow burn, not a big bang. And I think that's partly because I think we all remember our first HD experience. It's spectacular. It was such a step change in the video quality that it really changed TV, frankly. And I think 4K is more of an incremental step. Rogers and Bell, frankly, have been innovators, and Canada's actually ahead in terms of linear 4K, in terms of what's available, primarily with the sports and Blue Jays and NHL games. So it's something that if customers want it and if they're demanding it, we'll get into the game. There's a roadmap for us. You know, not unlike HD, you need the TV, the processing, or the box, and then you need content, obviously. And so there's content out there, and so we'll get into that game when it makes sense. Things like AR and VR are things that more as an ISP we're paying attention to, and you know, we often have these 10-year conversations about what speeds and what tiers we need to offer customers by when, what is the role of upload and download in a world where you're doing two-way, you know, video conferencing immersed in, you know, VR and AR environments. And it's you know, one thing I've learned in this industry is never say never, and the thing about underestimating 10 years and overestimating 2 years is right on. So we sort of plan our networking planning thinking that you never know when the next hit's going to come. And people had a real tough time articulating what augmented reality was not even a few years ago, and then Pokemon Go comes along and everyone's, I get it now. And so you never know when the next hit's going to come, and you never know when the application's going to take off. The networks, devices, you sort of have this perfect storm. What's created the last 10 years of video distribution could happen in AR, VR. Also from the mobile network, we're paying close attention to this, so things like self-driving cars. I mean, this is sort of the span of what we're looking at, but yeah, those things could happen, and it could change content for sure.
I was going to say, John,
There's just one thing I totally agree, and one thing I'd like to point out from the producer point of view, and I throw this out there to you, is when you're thinking about 4K and screens, 4K actually has an incremental cost of production that's relatively significant depending on what type of content you're doing. If you're doing a period piece, it's not such a big issue, but if you're doing an action or some sort of VFX-driven piece, 4K can be extraordinarily expensive because 2K effects in a 4K world, up-res, look great, but at some point it goes to 4K VFX, and that's extraordinarily expensive. The HDR angle, which comes along with 4K, is sort of the Trojan horse of moving the technology further, because that's a post activity that is very low cost, and increasingly, when you see HDR, whether it's Dolby Vision, HDR10, HDR10 Plus, log gamma, all these other things, you look at it and you go, oh my gosh, that's so producer friendly. You don't have to do a thing today except what you're doing, and your storytelling comes out better. I would talk that up as much as you could, because 4K will be great for the big events for now, high cost, Canada's leading, you can subsidize it in many different ways, but really HDR is some magic, and you get it for free on 4K sets. So from a producer point of view, that's what I would think about.
With that, I mean, we could sit here and talk all day, but we have about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to open it up to the floor for anyone who has some specific questions for this esteemed panel. And I'm going to look for, I can't really see, so
Is it possible to turn
the lights down a little bit.
the lights up a little bit?
There we go.
It's also less blinding.
Questions? I don't see any.
While we're waiting for a question, I would say one of the great things that I did recently was go to the IBC conference, which is the traditional technology conference for broadcasting that's held every year in Amsterdam. And to listen to you and to listen to Jay say it is about not overestimating the 2-year impact and underestimating the 10-year. For those of you who can afford it or who are thinking, I'm not getting what I want out of the MIPCOM or these types of experiences, I'm not a shill for the IBC, but I'm telling you, being able to see the technology that's there, that is giving you the line of sight to that 2 and 10-year frame. And I find myself increasingly in conversations about technology, not about content, which is, challenging, but blessedly I have people who are very qualified at content, and I also have people who are good at technology. But to educate myself, I think I'll be going back to IBC.
Heather, did you see something there in particular that really still just stands out in your mind about, that really sort of woke you up a little bit?
I think the two kind of big insights for me coming out of IBC were the importance of voice. A lot of people were there talking about the end of the remote because remotes are hard. The manufacturers hate remotes. They're difficult to make work. They're difficult when they go wrong. And if you could find a voice-activated search that worked with all devices, yay! That was kind of their view. The other piece that came through, because I've been kind of skeptical about virtual reality and thought, I'm not so sure about that. What was clear was the AR that went beyond Pokemon or Snapchat. Watching, it was a Formula One race where they actually put an iPad in your hands and you were in the driver's seat. And so even though you were seeing this one thing, you could do this and see who's next to you in the car and who's coming up on your flank. It was really quite, and I'm not a Formula One person. I'm a football fan, but I found it quite, I thought, that's actually, I don't have to wear a big headset. I don't have to do any of that stuff. And again, when I watch, people watch TV now, they're all doing it with devices. Yeah. So to have a device that actually augments that experience with devices you already have and are comfortable with, that was an insight for me that AR is actually something producers should be thinking about as they're creating whatever that experience is.
I think you're absolutely right, because one thing to think about just technologically is AR is low power. If you think about it that way, VR is high power. And I mean actually power into the wall to have a large water-cooled machine do a great VR experience, which is amazing, versus AR, which can be done on an iPhone today. So you're going to see over time, it's a personal belief, that VR is a subset of AR. I don't mean behaviorally, but you will have AR experiences all the time, which will be helping you in your day-to-day life. And imagine if you had memory issues or the like, how powerful that could be. And then glasses can go opaque, and you can have a VR experience. So exactly as you point out, the augmentation is low power there today, and that's really dynamic because that can be experimented with easily. You don't have to look at what's my installed base of PS4 versus HTC Vive versus Oculus. It's a really smart thought, and it calls one other thing into point, which is the new spec for broadcasting, which is ATSC 3, contemplates a combined video, digital, interactive media environment. And whether it ever gets traction or not is another big question, but it's exactly to where you're going so that you can have these augmented experiences, and then certainly over time it will be much more closed glass VR when people want to sort of jack into the network, as the old, sci-fi guys used to say, and have their, completely disconnected experience. Or socially connected through that.
John, just to continue on that point then, so, something like ATSC 3, can you give us, or this group, sort of a bit of a sort of summary on what that is and what to expect?
Sure, it's very easy to understand if you just look at it this way. The first ATSC Spec 1 brought us 1080i television, HD TV broadcast. The ATSC 2 spec never went anywhere. So what 3 does is the world of broadcast engineering realized, Jake can help me out where I go wrong, that you need to, please jump in too, that you needed to have mixed modality. So you had a one-way broadcast environment that's high bandwidth, and so what they did was for ATSC 3, they went from a compression standard you might have heard of, MPEG, to a high-efficiency video codec, which gets them Ultra HD 4K pictures sent to your TV. It's about 25% higher bit rate. So the old one was about 19 megabits. This is 24 megabits, and that's enough to have a 4K with this new encoding. But what they also did was they designed the spec for the broadcast piece to be very what we could think of as object-oriented. So within the broadcast space that you're getting a screen presentation of a sporting event, different elements can have object properties that then can be interacted with, and I'm using a simple example, through an internet connection on a mobile device. So they started to think about what's a world where you have a very high bandwidth one-way environment, and then how within that environment can I then link to a internet style to the point of having a pad or AR glasses. And that's where their spec is going to bring greater relevancy to broadcast. And this is not theory, because all of the LG sets that are being sold now today are ATSC 3 spec compliant, and the Olympics in Korea will have this. So the thing you need to take away is better picture at 4K, a very interactive, friendly way of pulling out of linear content elements that then can be interacted with on a device and in a two-way fashion. Did I get that right?
It's so not going away. I have a meeting on it next week. And I didn't really realize what the meeting was about, so I'm
There
very
you go. Now you know.
They just said,
delighted to
that
get
was
this
okay.
little
panel
That
primer.
was good
Well,
enough, but it wasn't.
John, did you want to add anything there, John? John Young, did you want to?
No, I've absolutely nothing whatsoever. I'm just trying to figure out how to make payroll for 46 animators who are working on a show, and 2 guys backing up lumber at a set in Hamilton right now. So that's kind of where my head's at. But as a consumer, for sure, as a producer, distributor, and builder of our business, we certainly have people thinking about this, but I wouldn't say, and probably for most of the people in this room, as I say, we're trying to come up with the show first, and the technology changes will absolutely drive how we make content, what content we make, and we have to be aware of that for sure. But it's a little lower on my priority list at the moment.
Right, fair enough. And just doing a time check, I think with that, we're going to conclude this panel. So I'd like to thank Heather, John, and Jay for giving us their thoughts today. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.